all of you on here, if you could, anybody who can open their camera up because they're out of their pajamas or not walking around their underwear, please do so, even just for a moment, so I can see you and say hello. And then you can turn it off if you need to. If you still are in your underwear, please leave the camera off for the obvious reasons. Okay, very good. I see my friend Henry here and Andrea, and so I'm glad you're all here. So we'll begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And we are, this is the 10th canto, chapter 23, verse 34. I'm going to give a little context here. We're dealing with what some would call a very delicate issue. And the delicate issue is the role of women in society, in a spiritual society. Obviously, it's a totally non-controversial topic, except among everyone. Now, I had mentioned in the last class I gave, I believe, but I'll say again, there are various injunctions and shoulds and suggestions that we find through any shastra, in any tradition. And we need to divide them into two categories. One is descriptive. This is, at that point in time, what people did. And the other is prescriptive. This is what you ought to be doing. It is not always clear when we're reading the Bhagavatam which it is. That requires intelligence, discretion, thoughtfulness, and discussion. But again, it is not always clear, and that's a very, very important point. So when we read certain matters of etiquette, is that something that we ought to be doing, or is it something, a description of how people did things at a particular time and place? I'll give you an extreme example. Sometimes you had the sati rites, where a husband would die and the woman would go in the fire. Now, that's been banned in India. Now, and we find such stories, they're rare, but they occur in Shastra. Is that something that people ought to do, or is it a description of what some people did at that time? It's clearly not an obligation, a suggestion, or necessarily even a good thing to do. It's something that was done under particular circumstance. So making this distinction is not always easy. We'll find that there are liberals and conservatives in the world. Some of you are born with quite liberal politics. Some of you are born with conservative politics. It's a matter of nature. The secret of a spiritual society is we listen to each other and get along. So the issue, there are few more divisive issues in religious movements around the world than the role of gender. You just don't find anything more divisive. In Florida, the Methodist Church just split into two over the issue of women and gay marriage. Can gays? What's the position of gays being married? And they split. We find that all over the world, virtually everywhere, these are major topics. Now, so what's going on? This chapter actually gives us some insight, believe it or not, into some of these topics. That is not how things usually what that might not be what we expect in a chapter in which the Brahmins' wives are blessed. So I'm going to give a little context of the story here. Lord Krishna and Balaram and the cowherd boys are out and about doing their cowherd thing or whatever. The Brahmin men are doing a major yajna and they're all concentrated. Their wives are at a residence nearby, cooking and preparing a prasadam or whatever for the yajna, for those attending the yajna. So while this is going on, Krishna became hungry, and Balaram were hungry, and all the cowherd boys were hungry. One cowherd boy said, "Rama, mighty armed one, O Krishna, chastiser of the wicked," Rama being Balaram, "we are being harassed by hunger, and you should do something about it." Now, when you're hungry, I don't know, when I'm hungry, I become, what's that word? Angry.
Angry.
Yeah, angry. They call it hungry. Really, so we can all become a little grouchy and hungry. And cowboys are hungry. They're just young boys. They're very active. They're very hungry. So what Lord Krishna says, very clever. He says, go to the sacrificial arena where a group of Brahmins are now performing the sacrifice to gain promotion to heaven. In other words, this is not pure devotional service. Simply request some food. Declare to them the name of my elder brother, Balaram, and my name, and explain that you have been sent by us. So the cowherd boys went, submitted their request, stood before the Brahmins with folded hands, and the Brahmins said, basically, to use modern New York vernacular, hell no. We're doing a sacrifice, and what are you kids bothering us about? The purport, which Hridayananda Maharaj wrote, says, this will illustrate the ritualistic Brahmins approached by the cowherd boys were not at all properly enlightened and thus could not appreciate the position of Krishna and Balaram. In fact, this pastime exposes a pretentious position of the so-called Brahmins who are not faithful devotees. So then it gets kind of interesting. So the boys say, Lord Rama and Lord Achyuta, Krishna, are tending their cows. They are hungry and want you to give them some of your food. Oh, best of the knowers of religion, if you have faith, please give them some food. Now, this is a literary technique that's commonly used in the Bhagavatam. And the literary technique is sarcasm. And when you read the Bhagavatam, sometimes we don't expect it, but it's often there. I mean, these are real people engaged in real discussions, and sarcasm is a literary tool. I'm going to read what the purport says. When the Brahmins did not respond to the cowherd boys' initial request, the boys addressed the Brahmins with a slight trace of sarcasm. Oh, best of the knowers of religion. In other words, you ignorant fools. but they're boys, and these are senior Brahmins. So they said, oh, best to know his religion. Anyone who knows religion knows the ultimate goal is to serve Krishna, not to go to heaven. So they're speaking sarcastically. Sometimes sarcasm can go over our head a little. Anyway, they refused. The boys gave some arguments that even according to the Vedic rituals, you're allowed to pause and feed us. They actually defeated the Brahmins, but the Brahmins were determined. Why were they so determined? They want to go to heaven. Now, if these are the kind of Brahmins who occupy heaven, I'm not sure I really want to go there. It's not the kind of people I want to, hang out with, floating on a cloud with my wings or whatever that heaven might be. So, hearing what happened, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord of the universe, simply laughed. Now, Krishna knew what the Brahmins were going to do, and he had a motive. So first, low-hanging fruit when you're hungry, fire sacrifice nearby, a lot of food there, go take some. But he knew what would happen. So then he suggested to the cowherd boys, tell the wives of these Brahmins that I have come here with Lord Sankarshan. This Lord Krishna speaking, Sankarshan being another name for Balaram. They will certainly give you the food you want, for they are most affectionate towards me. And indeed, and this is a very, very important line, and indeed, with their intelligence reside in me alone. So, while physically the wives of the Brahmins remained at home, within their minds, they resided in the Supreme Lord Krishna because of intense affection. And I'll read the last line of the purport, which is the essence of today's class. They would not need their husbands, they would not listen to their husbands' prohibitions, since they resided within the Lord through their transcendental intelligence. Now, this takes us, we have many, many examples in Bhagavatam where the men are stupid and the women are intelligent. Can somebody tell me a few?
Nagapatis.
Very good one. Nagapatis. These are the wives of Kaliya, and they were much better situated philosophically than Kaliya. Somebody tell me another example.
The gopis made themselves available to Krishna when he was having a headache, and they said, it's okay, you can put our dust on your head. And I think, who rejected Krishna? Who was it? Brahmanas or something? I can't tell.
Okay, that's very good. There was a famous Vaishnavi woman who philosophically in an assembly defeated everyone. Very famous, related to the Pandavas. Closely related to the Pandavas. Kunti, true. Kunti argued with her husband. Her husband said she wanted to call demigods to have more children because her husband could not procreate. Well, that's a whole other long story. And she argued with her husband and she won. And her husband admitted defeat. What's another one? Very famous story. Well, one lady just defeats everyone related to the Pandavas. Really knocks all the men on their rear with her philosophical arguments. Draupadi. When Draupadi was taken to the arena, she argued and the men were just bewildered. She got it right. So there are many cases in Shastra where the women philosophically, not emotionally, philosophically defeated the men. And sometimes we have strong statements by Prabhupada about the nature of women. There's like, they sound Shakespearean, like to quote from Hamlet, God giveth you one faith and you painteth another. You lisp, you amble, you jig. There shall be no more marriages. Get thee to a nunnery. Who said that? Come on, we must have some Shakespearean scholars here.
Is it Hamlet?
Hamlet,
That was Hamlet speaking to whom?
Ophelia.
Yes, Hamlet speaking to Ophelia. So we have that kind of negative attitude towards women. There are many stories, many novels, many jokes, we might say, a lot of misogynist babble in that area. But when it comes down to it, we find that there is a womanly nature, a lower womanly nature. And in which many novels are written, and Bhagavatam stories, ninth canto goes into this. Women can be catty and cliquish and all of this. These things happen. Yet, there are the men's nature, pompous, proud. Look at the Brahmins here. Here is Krishna in Vrindavan, and they want to go to heaven. So the point I'm trying to make, when we have the negative comments about women, Prabhupada is an equal opportunity basher. He bashes women, he bashes men, he bashes different people at different times. So if we take out of context what Prabhupada says, we say, oh, Prabhupada's being misogynist, or Prabhupada's being this or that. No, Prabhupada is an equal opportunity basher and an equal opportunity praiser. And in the Bhagavatam, these stories are usually, when it comes down to philosophical arguments, for the most part, the women win the arguments. And therefore, Prabhupada said, those women who become my disciples, they rise above whatever stereotype may be attributed to women. And Prabhupada uses these stereotypes himself. That's descriptive, not prescriptive. That's the main point. And also, there are stereotypes against men who are being proud. And I mean, look at Jarasandha, just time after time, he goes, attacks Krishna, gets defeated, and does it again. It's men at their stupidest. I find the GBC body now has 2 women. We'll have more on there. And representing ISKCON Resolve, I've attended many, many GBC meetings. I no longer do that, so I can concentrate on the Bhaktivedanta Institute. But I find many of the most intelligent and heartful comments come from the women. It adds a balance. When any board I am on, I serve on many different boards over the years, in and out of ISKCON. I find if the board is all men, it's not nearly as productive as one in which we have both genders. And Prabhupada understood that. And Prabhupada understood that in the West, by descriptive, not prescriptive, but descriptive, men and women were much more equal. So Prabhupada said, so that's how we'll do things. Because that wasn't very important, what the society's norm were. What was important was, what does it take to raise everyone's consciousness? So we're going to continue to the verse at hand, but I wanted to give this prelude, and I had tabbed these verses on purpose because they set a stage. Before I go on, though, are there any questions? Any questions, comments, criticisms, disagreements, reflections? Yes, Adi.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Prabhu. Nice to hear you. Always nice to see you and hear you.
Thank you for your perfect presentation that neither men nor women have a monopoly on the truth or
Or
stupidity.
Yeah, or stupidity.
Neither one has, and then Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, not my comment, but just what Krishna says, Striyo Vaishas Tata Shujas. Tepiyanti Parangatim. It says that anyone, woman, Vaishya, Shudra, whatever strata they may be born in, what kind of body, can arise to the highest platform if they're willing to surrender to Krishna. And Krishna cuts through that conundrum you were mentioning, that sometimes there's something that's a custom, and sometimes there's something that's a time and circumstance situation that is contrary to the custom. In the Bhagavad Gita, everything is, Arjuna breaks all the rules. Killed his teacher, fought against his elder, disobeyed this and that normal custom, and came down to the simple. And in one sense, it's not very complex. Krishna, what do you want me to do? And
Very
it's
well said. Very,
But-
that's
pretty
very-
simple. Krishna, what do you want me to do? Any person, and that humorous thing that Srila Prabhupada said to Mother Vishaka was telling us, men were saying, aren't women more lusty than men? And Prabhupada, yes. Aren't women more or less intelligent? Prabhupada, yes. And Mother Vishaka was there, and Prabhupada said to her, aren't you glad you're not a woman? And she said, oh, right, I'm not a woman. Anybody who thinks I'm a woman, what kind of intelligence is that? You know, I'm not this body. So everybody has access to the truth, and everybody can mistakenly think what should be done is not what Krishna wants, but some logical or customary activity. Sorry to talk so long.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. It was like the Brahmins. The Brahmins at the fire sacrifice didn't recognize Krishna. That's a problem. So, and the women, if we study brains, we find that men's left and right half, the emotional and analytical parts of the brains, have fewer neurological connections than women. Women have a more integrated brain. That's medical science. So women even, Prabhupada commented when he would visit churches, notice that go to churches in the morning, like say a Catholic church for mass, it was many more women than men occupying. They had piety and intelligence. Then again, we have that sometimes lower nature of women can be there too. Point is, the lower nature of women doesn't result in major wars. The lower nature of men results in major wars and destruction and horrors. So we're going to continue to the verse of the day. Shri Shuku Vacha iti ukta dvija patnischa yagna vatam purnargata te chandusa yavas tabi stribi satram aparyanan. So Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, thus instructed, the wives of the Brahmins return to the place of sacrifice. So Krishna told them, okay, if you stay with me, it's going to look bad. Now, he had just spent the whole night in the woods with the gopis, but they weren't married. And in this case, the husbands are going to really, first the women said, well, listen, we left our husbands and children, everything. Our husbands, fathers, sons, brothers will no longer take us back. How can anyone give us shelter? We've abandoned them. And Krishna says, don't worry about that. Says, I've taken care, rest assured, your husbands will not be inimical to you. In fact, at the end of the chapter, they apologize like anything, the husbands. They realized that they had been bewildered by rituals. I find this in the movement. People often get bewildered by rituals. Prabhupada famously said, we are not the International Society for Rules and Regulations. Not that we don't need the envelope the rules and regulations give us, but if we're bound to every detail on it. there was Kadamba Kanaswami, the wonderful Kadamba Kanaswami was passing on. And his guru, as you probably all know, is Jayadvaita Swami. So there he is in Vrindavan, conscious to the last minute. His last words, I believe he said he pointed to his heart and says movement, and then died, conscious to the end. Right before he died, he wasn't able to get out of bed, very weak. Cancer was racing through his body, had basically destroyed his lungs. And he still somehow got up and recorded a video that could only be played after he died. It's a very moving and heartfelt and brilliant video. I recommend you see it. So then he's chanting his 16 rounds every day. And his guru, Jayadvaita Swami, says, you're always chanting. Your body is destroyed by cancer. Just think of Krishna. Don't worry if you chant or not chant. It's too much of a strain now. And Kadamba Kana begged him, please do, that's his guru, do not give me that instruction. Please, I beg you, don't give me that instruction. I want to chant until the end. And Jayadvaita Swami said, of course. So we're not the International Society for Rules and Regulations. Even in that case, Jayadvaita Swami said, it's not necessary. You're just thinking of Krishna all the time. What difference does it make? And you're too weak. He said, no, I have to do it. I want to set that example. I want to leave with that as my legacy. Because we're not the International Society for Rules and Regulations, then we can be quite flexible without being sinful. So how to do that is an interesting question. But that's not the topic here. If somebody wants more on that, we can do that during question time. So now I'm moving on. Let me see. Krishna says, for you to remain in my okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So Krishna is instructing the ladies, go back home. One of the ladies who had been forcibly kept back by her husband, when she heard the others describe the Supreme Lord, she actually gave up her material body. That husband probably lamented that instruction. So Lord Krishna fed all the cowherd boys with all the 4 varieties of foodstuffs that the ladies brought. They brought a lot of food. Then the all-powerful Lord partook himself of the preparations. In other words, Krishna made sure his devotees were fed before he ate. Thus, the Supreme Lord, appearing like a human being to perform his pastimes, imitated the ways of human society. He enjoyed pleasing his cows, cowherd boys, cowherd girlfriends with his beauty, words, and actions. Then the Brahmins came to their senses. We have sinned. We've denied the request of the 2 lords of the universe, who deceptively appear as ordinary human beings. And they say wonderful words. To hell with our threefold birth, our celibacy, our extensive learning. To hell with our aristocratic background, our expertise in the rituals. They were all condemned because we're inimical to Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's the essence of Krishna consciousness. That is the same thing Prabhupada said. We're not the International Society for the Rules and Regulations. Then finally, in a purport a few verses ahead, I'm going to just read that because that's relevant for the theme. The husbands noted that the women, having perfected their transcendental attachment for Krishna, did not even have a trace of attachment left for home, husband, children, and so forth. Therefore, from that day on, the husbands accepted these ladies as their worshipful spiritual masters and no longer thought of them as their wives or property. Notice these women became the gurus for their husband. Sometimes I've seen ISKCON men say to their wives, you must do whatever I said. I am your guru. Aha. If you're the guru, then act like a guru. Don't act like a jerk. And in this case, the women all became the gurus and the husbands accepted that. So The idea is that when we look at verses, women are less intelligent, that is a descriptive that is a descriptive act, that is a description of a particular time and place, and even you might say stereotype. But when push comes to shove in the Bhagavatam, the women are often much more intelligent than the men. So this takes us to the point of sometimes it's difficult dealing with Prabhupada's literary style. Prabhupada's literary style includes a lot of hyperbole. It's a legitimate style. Prabhupada was trained in the Victoria English way of presentation. He went to Scottish Church College in Calcutta, still there. I even sat in Prabhupada's classroom. And I don't know if it was his chair or not, these uncomfortable wooden desks like I used to have when I was in elementary school. And it's still there. And in that was the context and literary style that Prabhupada was taught. We're all individuals, we're all persons. So we have to take these, let's say, so-called controversial verses from Prabhupada are easily understood when they're put in context. And that's everything in Shastra is that way. I'll give you an example. Take a common word that I think all of you know, Atma. What does it mean? Well, it means a lot of things. Sometimes it refers to super soul, sometimes our self, sometimes our mind. It actually, if you look in the Sanskrit dictionary, it has many meanings. How do we know which meaning it is? Well, the only way to know is in the context in which it is used. And that's how we understand Shastra. We never understand Shastra just one verse at a time. We understand everything within a context. We may quote a verse to support a point, just as Adi did a few minutes ago, but we understand Shastra in context, controversial or not controversial. That's the way of understanding it. It requires a finer brain substance to understand Shastra, because what does intelligence means? It means we're discerning. We can figure things out. The word, I asked one devotee, very senior devotee, of great intelligence, and he was one of the longest serving Prabhupada secretaries. And I said to him, what's the most dangerous thing for ISKCON? Does anybody, I've said this before, anybody know what it is? The most dangerous thing for the future of ISKCON. It's two words. Any guesses?
No questions?
Well, that is dangerous. That is very dangerous for that, but something even more dangerous. It's saying something. I'll tell you what it is. We'll have a little drum roll. It is, Prabhupada says, the most dangerous thing for the movement is Prabhupada says, because somebody will quote, Prabhupada says, no context, no in-depth. Prabhupada said women are this, or Prabhupada said we should do this, we should do that. And all these Prabhupada says are without any analysis, without context, without nuances. And the most dangerous thing, because all you do is just have people quoting. And Prabhupada had said almost on any issue, things on both sides of the issue. Because Prabhupada spoke nuanced, in context, under particular circumstances. So you can find on most controversial issues, Prabhupada saying both things. So you just have the war of Prabhupada says, which means we've given up our entire intelligence and become religious fanatics. Now, that doesn't mean we can't quote Prabhupada, but we quote it intelligently in a context with some understanding. but just to have a war of quotes. I've been an ISKCON mediator for a long time. Sometimes I had to mediate controversial issues for the GBC. And when I'd be in the room with warring parties, and one of them would go into the Prabhupada says mood, there is no discussion. It's over. And they become what I call philosophical morons, because they can't discuss philosophy. And Prabhupada wanted us to be Brahminical. He wanted us to have good intelligence, which means we can dig deeper. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions on this topic. It's a very important chapter because it establishes what it really means to be transcendental, which is beyond what particular body I have. I may have a women's body, I may have a men's body, I may have a trans body, I may have any kind of body, and that is very irrelevant. Andrea, I see your hand is raised.
Hare Krishna, Brahma Tirtha Das Prabhu. It's always so lovely to get virtual darshan of you or association. Yeah. I don't have a question. I just have an appreciation. I really appreciate you taking the time to go into a little bit of what I've heard you describe before as hermeneutics. And if we could give a shout out to the whole hermeneutics and ISKCON training, I think that's great. I've been wanting to take it, and I think you giving us a little bit of a taste or an appetizer of it is really important. And I really appreciate you bringing in the idea of discernment, because I know a very dear spiritual teacher of mine, Rukmini Walker, she's always talking about how important it is for us to use our discernment in our Krishna consciousness and how we go about life and how we speak to others about Krishna and how we connect to others in regarding Krishna, so that we leave a good taste in their mouth when it comes to Krishna consciousness, as opposed to leaving a bad taste in their mouth. And then we can be inadvertently pushing them away from Krishna. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
So thank you. Thank you very much for the comment. We ought to be very careful in using the word should. We tend to use it, religious people tend to use it a lot, but then we end up with piles of should up to our neck, and we're stuck in these piles of should. And so, I mean, Prabhupada uses a word, it's a legitimate word. I mean, I should get up early. These are reasonable statements, but we have to be careful we don't pile on the should. And then eventually, if it rises above our nose, we'll suffocate in shoulds. When I was first in Mayapur, and I've told this before, but I was the only guest at the first Mayapur festival. So a few Muslim villagers came, and one, there were mostly Western devotees, about 60, 70, and one English-speaking guest, me. And if a devotee had joined the movement 2 weeks before or 6 years before, which would have been the longest, there was no way for me to tell. I mean, they all had the same bed sheet and clay marks and, funny haircuts and everything like that. I couldn't figure it out. And I was getting piles of should left and right. This should, that should. One devotee came to me, I had a cold, and I was taking ordinary, like an Alka-Seltzer or something like that, ordinary medicine. And one devotee gave me a 20-minute lecture on how I'm poisoning myself and should only use Ayurveda. And the next devotee walks up to me and says, I have a cold. I heard you have some Alka-Seltzer. Can I have one? And I mean, it was very bewildering. So I asked Prabhupada, I saw him in Calcutta shortly after Mayapur, what is the should that I should follow? What's the most important should for all of us? Because it was very bewildering. Somebody said the most important thing is chanting. Next one, the most important thing is a cold shower in the morning. Well, that was easy. I never had hot water the whole time I was in India, so that was easy. Everyone had their opinion. And Prabhupada said, the only thing that solves the whole problem is good association. Then everything else falls into place. So the only should Prabhupada felt was critically important is we should be careful of who we associate with. Everything else comes from that. So that's the number one should. Any other questions or comments?
Brahma Tirtha Prabhu, what is that context that we should always keep Prabhupada's statements in? How do we create that context? Where do we find it? What is it?
You're asking what is the context in which we say that a different way? That question.
You said that you said very beautifully how we should always consider Srila Prabhupada's statements in the right context, not taking them out of context. So what is that context?
Okay.
How do we create that context? What is it made out of?
It's made out of Bhagavatam classes and asking questions. This is the context right here, where we're all together, we're focusing on Shastra and discussing among ourselves. Vaisheshika famously, if Vaisheshika is a GBC deputy and will not become a GBC man. And I asked him why. Because he has a zone, he manages, why, and he has such wisdom. Well, he says GBC has a winter meeting. And in the winter, I go to Vrindavan, or Govardhan actually. And for 1 month, I sit with a group of devotees and we read Shastra together and discuss. And I would have to give that up to be a GBC member because I'm obligated to attend the 2 meetings a year and I don't want to do it. So therefore I won't become a GBC man. Because what is he doing? He's doing like we're doing, but sitting intensely for a month every day, reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, for example, and trying to understand it, raising controversies, trying to dig deeper into it. So the context is discussing among devotees, and having doubts is having some doubt is a sign of intelligence. Somebody comes and says, I have no doubts, I accept everything. They're either an amazingly pure devotee or intellectually shallow. And amazingly pure devotees are fairly rare, but it happens. So if somebody, Prabhupada said, if you come on just sentiment, I agree with everything, then you're going to leave on sentiment too. But if you come with deep understanding, then when something challenges your faith, you know what to do and you're going to stay. Prabhupada said, don't be amazed that people leave, be amazed they stay. It's not a simple life. I mean, it is simple, you might say. I guess it is a simple life. It's just not an easy life. I mean, at the end of the day, I had a tough day. Boy, all I need is a good Budweiser and I'll be fine. That's not our option now. So sometimes we try to make that up with gulab jamun juice, but that's a different matter. We have our own ways of intoxication, I guess. Okay, we have, it's almost, yeah. Oh, I see. There's a comment here. Let me see. Okay, somebody asked the question, what about, I must say I love Krishna, but I have some doubts about Prabhupada because of his statements. And again, Prabhupada was born in the 1800s. One of the most famous American novels is Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, those 2 novels by Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. And they're brilliant novels. Yet the language in there would not be acceptable nowadays. I mean, Mark Twain was quite the anti-racist in many regards, except he refers to Black people using the N-word because that's the language people used at that time. There wasn't a verboten word at that time. So Prabhupada sometimes that there are two kinds of statements Prabhupada made, and they're very important to make this distinction. Somebody put in the chat the article by Hridayananda Maharaj on this, and that's the article I'm actually quoting from right now. Thank you, Drea, for putting that in there. Prabhupada would often say, I don't have an opinion. All I'm doing is saying what Krishna says. And he said this many times. I'm just repeating what Krishna said. I don't have an opinion. Many other times, Prabhupada says, this is my opinion. This is what I think. I have this opinion. Well, did Prabhupada have an opinion or not have an opinion? What's the answer? And the answer is, when Prabhupada was speaking Shastra, he didn't have opinions, repeating Krishna words, but he's a person brought up under certain circumstances, a very conservative Bengali society. His mother couldn't even cross the street without getting in a palanquin and being carried to her neighbor's house. It was a very conservative society. That's how he was brought up. And so Prabhupada would say, this is my opinion. I think there'll be a war with Russia. There might be a war with China. He would make comments like that. Clearly, these are not Shastric statements. It's his opinion. I have an opinion. Some people like pizza. Some people like pakoras. It's an opinion. We're individuals. We're supposed to have opinions. We're personalists. We want to be personalists. So Prabhupada had certain opinions based on how he was brought up. But when it came down to it, he always sided on, we're not this body. He always sided on, we're not this body, that women are equal. One time, Bhakti Tirtha Swami went to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, there are racists in the movement. And Prabhupada said, that is your Maya to think that they can insult you by insulting your body because you're not this body. It's their Maya to identify you in that way. So it says both are in Maya. We have to rise above it. Prabhupada, in all of his dealings with women, blacks, everyone else was equal. But sometimes in the particular context Prabhupada was brought up in, he would quote things. I'll tell you a story, that kind of a sidebar story. One time Prabhupada was sitting with his sannyasi disciples, and he turns to them and says, so I hear the best prostitutes are in Thailand. These are his sannyasis. He says, what do you think? Some of them might have actually known the answer from their pre-devotional days. But I mean, now, Prabhupada, can we now quote as Shastra that if I want a prostitute, the place I should go to is Thailand because they have the best? Is that what Prabhupada is really saying? No. One of the sannyasis sort of had the nerve to turn to Prabhupada and said, how do you know? And Prabhupada was obviously just joking around here. Prabhupada did joke around a lot, by the way. And then Prabhupada said, well, when I was a grahasta, I used to go to the barber shop. And I was at the barber shop, that's what they would talk about. So that's how I know that. So Prabhupada so we can say, if somebody would take that out of context, Prabhupada says the best prostitutes are in Thailand. Now they can take that totally out of context. Say Prabhupada just said that. Now look at Prabhupada, he's encouraging prostitution. He's hurting the women of Thailand. He's doing this, he's doing that. We can take that out of context and really bash Prabhupada. But you put it in the context, it all makes sense. And it's actually pretty funny. But Prabhupada's sometimes his sense of humor, his sense of hyperbole is not what we're used to in the West. So it comes out kind of odd. And I don't mind anybody bringing up a controversial statement of Prabhupada to discuss, because I'm not going to whitewash it. Oh, he didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. But I'm going to contextualize it. And I've never had a time when I contextualize it I'm not going to say when I contextualize it that it doesn't work. Some of the things Prabhupada said will actually be hurtful. I'll give you an example that I can relate to. Prabhupada said Hitler was a gentleman. Now, that's a very controversial quote. Hitler, I come from a Jewish family, and Hitler's, made lampshades out of some of my relatives. And I know if I have relatives that went through the Holocaust and had tattoos on them from their number. And to say that can be very hurtful. Yet, when Prabhupada lists the great demons of the world in the Bhagavatam, Hiranyakasipu and Kamsa and Stalin and Hitler. So Prabhupada clearly in the Bhagavatam saw Hitler as one of the great demons, and he put him in the same category as Kamsa and Hiranyakasipu. He put him in the category of some of the worst demons we've ever seen. So how can I reconcile that? Well, what Prabhupada was doing was, from the British point of view, from the Indian point of view, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And during World War II, the enemy of Britain was Germany. The enemy of India was Britain, England, because they were subjugating India. It was their crown colony. So Indians had some sympathy towards the Japanese and the British. In fact, toward Japanese and the Germans. In fact, when the reason India gave independence was less to do with Gandhi and more to do with Bose, because there were many Indian soldiers who became Japanese prisoners of war. Many Indian soldiers in the British Army were sent to the Japanese front. They were captured, and then the Japanese rearmed them, and made an army to go invade India, because these people didn't have much loyalty to Britain, and they liked the Japanese more because the Japanese were opposed to Britain, and Britain was subjugating India. So it was that army that actually won it. So there was a certain sympathy in India towards the German Japanese because of the British subrogation of India. The British at that time, if you went to the ocean, as Gandhi did, and took some water out and evaporated it to make salt for your food, you went to jail, which Gandhi did. They had a salt tax, and salt was taxed. You could not go to the ocean, evaporate water, and make salt for your food. So there was a lot of oppressive things went on. So Prabhupada would be speaking in context that Hitler could have done certain things he didn't do. That was gentlemanly. But in the end result, Prabhupada considers him one of the greatest demons of the world. But in a particular, very, very narrow context, there was some nasty things Hitler could have done he didn't do. So Prabhupada gave that little bit of credit. But if we take that out of context, it seems horrible. When some of the things Prabhupada said, so to a Jewish person, that can be very hurtful. When Prabhupada talks that blacks are not very pretty or something like that, it can be very hurtful. But again, there's a context to this. Sometimes we think that everything Prabhupada said comes from Krishna within the heart. That's not what Prabhupada said. Again, you can read the paper that Andrea posted. When Prabhupada's talking about Shastra, that is the inspiration from Krishna. When he's talking about mundane things, He has his own opinion from his own upbringing, and sometimes the language can be very awkward. And there's no denying that. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I'm just saying how it is and what it is. So with that, I will stop here. If anybody would like to have a private discussion on these topics, I am glad to do it. It's a very, very important topic, how to contextualize Prabhupada and understand him. There are two extremes that are very dangerous. One extreme is we elevate Prabhupada, practically make him God. Everything he says comes from Krishna, and we can't contextualize anything. The other extreme is we minimize Prabhupada. And Prabhupada wanted us to be good Buddhists and take the middle way. How do I know that? Read the Gita. Prabhupada discusses, Krishna actually says it himself, don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Very Buddhist. Don't drink, don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. Very Buddhist, middle road. So Prabhupada was trying to encourage us to be philosophically astute and take a middle route, which includes sometimes contextualizing what he said, which can be painful and difficult, but must be done. With that, I've gone way, way over time for an important topic. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a good day thinking of Krishna, and you're all healthy and happy, and which means you're not going to read the newspapers.
Thank you, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu. It's so nice to have you, such a mature, realized Vaishnava. Thank you very much for making yourself available to us. Thanks everyone for participating actively. Can you take one more question, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu? A brief one.
Sure.
How do we take sarcasm? Is it healthy? There's a question in the chat from William about sarcasm. He's wondering how do we take it as devotees? Devotional sarcasm and mundane sarcasm. Does that have?
I'm tempted to make a sarcastic comment, but I can't think of it. Yeah,
William, take it.
Darn it. I just need a good sarcastic comment. Boy, it caught me by surprise. I need to think about one for a minute. Sarcasm is a literary tool. In the Bhagavatam, I mean, Vedavyas uses sarcasm. Prabhupada uses it. It's a kind of humor to make a point. So sarcasm can be very painful too. So we have to use sarcasm with discretion. We have to be careful, because I know some people, sarcasm doesn't work very well, and it really turns them off. Other people, sarcasm really can help make a point. So when the young boys went to the Brahmins, oh, great Brahmins, you understand all religious principles. That was sarcasm. They were defying every religious principle, ignoring Krishna to go to heaven. That was healthy sarcasm. Unhealthy sarcasm might be to go to someone, let's say a lady said something and said, oh, yes, you ladies, let's say a lady said something that was really not very intelligent. Say, oh, you ladies are most intelligent. That would be sarcasm and be very counterproductive to criticize. So sarcasm is a very sharp knife. So we have to use it carefully. A knife can be used to surgically repair you, or it can be used to slit your throat. So sarcasm is one of those sharp knives that has to be used by an expert surgeon. If somebody's not good at it, don't do it. If you're good at it, it can be an effective communication tool. So I hope that helps. And darn, I wish I had a sarcastic comment.
Thank you, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Very good. William has his hand raised.
That was his question.
That was his question. William, that was a nice way to end the class with that question. Thank you very much. If there's anything else, we'll talk another time. We'll see you next month. I wish everyone will be happy, and in not too long a time, they'll all be at New York Rath Yatra.
Jai, jai, jai. Look forward to seeing everybody, hugging everybody. Hare Krishna. Have a wonderful Friday. Give it to Krishna. Don't be a philosophical moron. Use sarcasm surgically, and everything is going to be all right. Hare Krishna.